Live from the Clarity from Chaos studios, heard worldwide, it's Dave Campbell. On every episode, Dave and his guests explore, discuss, and work on solutions to some of life's biggest challenges. So, if you're ready, be prepared to be enlightened, amused, and even shocked by what you hear. And now, the real, the authentic, the one and only Dave Campbell.
Welcome, everyone. You're listening to Clarity from Chaos. I'm your host, Dave Campbell. If you're new to the show and you like what we're doing here, go out to my website and hit the subscribe button for the support that you would like to add. The site address is clarityfromchaos.substack.com. While you're out at the website, you can also go up to the About tab on the top ribbon and see who the upcoming guests for the month are. Before we get into this edition of Clarity, I would like to share a few thoughts. Today, we are seeing the rise of Marxism like never before in our country. Other than President Trump, our political elites have and will continue to support socialism and Marxism. Since the fall of the Soviet Union, the American Marxists have been waiting to unleash their version of social justice with things like CRT, woke, cancel culture on our culture and country. They have been successful in rewriting history, reintroducing racism, creating the concept of a privileged class, and determining what can or cannot be said in public discourse. These people are out to destroy our country and are doing so because it was founded on a Judeo-Christian idea, and they cannot stand it. Make no mistake, this is a conflict that needs to be won. We need to stop thinking in terms of Democrat, Republican, global elites, corporate media as adversaries, and start thinking more biblical. We need to bring the church and the Bible back into our lives, and we need to elect people who answer to a higher authority and not the puppet masters they answer to today. We are incredibly pleased to welcome to Clarity the author of DC Swamp Strikes Back, Aaron Burr, Donald Trump, and their similar battles, Mr. Dennis Brennan. Welcome to the show, Dennis.
Well, Dave, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
So, relative to the swamp, Dennis, it's been around since the forming of our government. I mean, there have been scallywags throughout history trying to do harm to what we have put together. So how is this new? I mean, I know Trump is, and we've started talking about the swamp, but what are your thoughts around the Republic, and the swamp? Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting because you're the first one that I've talked to that realizes the swamp has been around since the founding. Or
Really?
certainly I'd say if it wasn't exactly in the first, the founding and the Washington term, it was around by the time Adams was president, for sure.
Absolutely.
Burr, who's part of this book, has a lot of similarities with Trump and the battles that he had, mostly because both of these guys, when they went to Washington, were kind of outsiders. Trump hadn't served anywhere. Burr had served in Congress, but a very short time. He wasn't really liked by anybody. Sounds
Right.
similar, right? I mean, Trump coming in,
Yeah.
when Trump came into the Republican Party, I mean, I even thought when I saw whatever it was, 15, 16 guys up there, he has no chance. How is he winning this thing? But, I was wrong. And I think that, those battles, like you say, the swamp's been around, found that out first. That even the allies, Jefferson and him were allied because he basically got Jefferson elected in that Jefferson's first term. He doesn't get the credit for that because everybody is so enamored with Hamilton and the musical and rewriting of history. But the people around Jefferson didn't see him as some hero bringing in the votes from New York. They saw him as a guy that was going to interfere with, the Virginia presidencies where they wanted to keep it in Virginia. And they went all out to try to basically get in Jefferson's ear all the time, running Burr down and trying to get him off the ticket, which they did for the second term. And I think some of those things, the relationships, which we go through, in the book, the same thing we have now. You'll find somebody's relative as a U.S. attorney or everybody seems to be related, or they're so locked in with political friendships. And
Well, yeah,
sometimes
I think what everybody seems to be missing, and unfortunately, Elon Musk started to pull the covers back a little bit, is the funding of these NGOs and how the monies you know basically went in a circular pattern, right, to the NGOs and then back to the hand that gave them to them, and so on and so on and so on. and
Mhm.
and now we're starting to hear a revisitation, if you will, to the Clinton Foundation, which apparently was scrapped during the 16 election because they didn't want anybody pissing in Hillary's campfire, right? So, so they shut that down, and now we have memos. Grassley's got memos that says, basically that's exactly what they did. So, that's why I made the comment. This crap has been around for a long time. The unfortunate part, I think, is that Donald Trump, because he didn't have the ties to all of these good old boy networks and everything else, kind of put his foot in the mousetrap, if you will. And, it started to become very vocal about the the swamp. I think if you look back on the Kennedy assassination, I think all of that was swamp related.
Mhm.
So
Right.
the idea that these self-serving politicians just began in 26, I ain't buying that.
Well, that's kind of the Trumpism, right?
Yeah.
Trump would say nobody has been treated like this. Nobody's had to, and some of that he's right about, but some of it,
Yeah. Oh, no,
so-
some of the nasty newspaper articles and stuff that were written back and forth about people. I mean,
yeah,
there was some, we didn't obviously have mass media like we have now where it's instantaneous, but there were some extremely nasty things going on, right?
absolutely, yeah. And it was, honestly, it was because of a letter to the editor that was published that caused the whole duel between Hamilton and
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so, you're right. We have had those problems, maybe different form, less instantaneous, less chance, back then to respond quickly because it took a long time to get it out. But they were doing it and they were calling each other names and, so Trump didn't invent that for
No,
those that think he did.
no.
And yeah, so the media has been a problem for years. Back then, a lot of it was owned by the parties. Now, there's such an interconnection between political people and the bosses of the media, the reporters, the columnists, family, and they work for these people, and then they present themselves as journalists, which is a problem because
Well,
most aren't.
yeah, yeah, um, and that brings up my next question. I mean, we've seen a consolidation over the last 40 years of 50 some odd media companies boiling down to 5 or 6 now, which means we have 5 or 6 CEOs and probably a couple of hundred executives that are determining everything the electorate reads, sees, and hears
Hmm.
across the board. So whatever their ideology is, if and I believe that's the rise of the DSA and everything else and what's going on right now. I mean, the media is totally complicit, and I believe at this point they're a malignant cancer on the society.
Yeah. I agree. I think the problem we have, Trump took a lot of heat when he was calling the media the enemy of the people.
Yeah, and fake news and everything
Yeah.
else. Yeah.
And he wasn't the one to invent fake news. That was around too. I mean, people have had a problem with the media for a long time. It's just gotten worse as time has gone on. And there's surveys that tell you, the latest survey, which I think was 3 or 4 years ago, only 3% of all journalists and all the newsrooms across the country, including places like Wyoming and Alabama and anywhere else you get Republican votes in large part, there's only 3% that are Republican. Right there, there's a problem with bias when only 3% of your journalists are, of one party.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
mean, and I think the problem is, yeah, we have a lot of consolidated power. You look at social media, what they did back in the 2020 race, where it was really consolidated among, two or three individuals, and they all shut it down. And it's like, wait a minute, we can't get our voices out there. Now, I think there's been some of that pushback, and I do go through and reference a lot of that in the book about people that have popped up prior to that time and since, whether it's podcasts, blogging, Substack. You know, it is interesting. People are getting their news in a different way because they're turning against what we know to be a biased institution. And at some point, you say, I do it all the time now. I'll read an article in the Chicago Tribune, for instance, and I get through the first paragraph or so, and I'm like, I don't think that's true, or it's an opinion,
Right.
basically. And then
Yep.
I'm researching myself to say, wait a minute, this isn't right. But I shouldn't have to do that.
No. And anybody that doesn't, and you don't have to agree with what we're saying here, but anybody that has any kind of curiosity, go out and try to do a search on a known item on the internet that you know to be true and see how it gets manipulated by Google or whatever their algorithms are, because you can get a different version of the search depending on which search engine you use.
Hmm.
So, if everybody's hung up on MSN as far as their search engine, they might as well just tune in and watch The View and let The View determine their whole ideology and their whole thought process, because that's all they're getting, right?
Yeah.
And and I understand that people don't have the time or the inclination to beat through this, but I think part of the problem that we have is that they're not doing that, right? Is that they're not standing up like a little 3-year-old and pulling on daddy's shirt tail and going, "Why? Why? Why?" They don't do that anymore, right? They just take
Right.
this crap verbatim and run with
And
it.
I think the problem
And if
is,
it's on social media, th
well,
go ahead. What?
well, you
What were
you
you
were
gonna
going to,
say?
I think, start on social media. I
Yeah,
think social media is a real problem because, people post things that are totally false. And I know, the left use this as, disinformation and misinformation, but that runs on both sides. There are people that post things that are totally wrong and you read it and you're like, how come it's not, it might just be a posting. It doesn't have a link to a story even. It's bad enough when it links to, let's say it's the AP News and you read it and you go, well, that's not exactly right. There's a lot of opinion there. And that's bad enough. But a lot of times they'll just print a story or it looks like a story and it's totally made up. They just wrote it themselves to mislead a bunch of people on social media and get clicks, I guess. I'm not sure I understand why people do that.
well, yeah, it's interesting because they measure this crap in the number of likes, the number of followers, whatever it is, because it makes them feel like it validates them. It validates, you know, who they are and everything else. And that's the shame of all of this, I think, Dennis, is the fact that people on social media are looking for validation because somewhere along the line in their growing up, they either didn't feel like they were good enough or whatever, and then we allowed COVID to lock everybody down. So the only way people could communicate was with that stupid phone. And now, now it's on steroids. I mean, people don't even want to have a face-to-face conversation anymore, Dennis. They, you know,
I know. And especially the younger you are, but it's not only the young people,
no,
unfortunately.
it's
It's
not
everybody.
just it. Yeah, it's
I mean,
it's senior citizens. that are locked in, and the only way that they can communicate is via the phone or their computer or whatever. Yeah, so it's not just the 15-year-olds. No.
No, and that's part of the problem. We don't know the psychological, mental health issues that are gonna be coming out because of our use of these phones. I suggest it's probably not limited to the kids, although I know a lot of people
No.
are starting to study that because you go to, I'll go to a restaurant on a Sunday morning, and there'll be people sitting at the same table with their phones out. They're not conversing like we are right now. They're sitting there each looking at their phone, probably at different feeds and, not
Exactly,
talking at all.
exactly. Um, and I think the other thing, since we're on this topic, is the destruction of authority. Um, because you just see people running rampant anymore. I picked up a news article this morning about a little old lady in, I believe it was Texas, shot and killed the two people that were trying to break into her home. And now the parents are suing this woman for $1 million or something. And so my first impression was, why aren't the parents accountable here?
Mhm.
Why aren't the parents on trial for raising two delinquents that would go out and kick some old lady's door down and try to rob her, right? There,
Yeah.
you don't exactly get Parent of the Year award for something like that, right?
No.
And they have the unmitigated gall to sue this 80 some odd year old woman because, two young men were kicking her door in, right? And she was afraid for her life or whatever. And, those two young men lost their lives because, she felt like she needed to defend herself. The fortunate part is, I would say at this point, is it happened in Texas. If that had happened in Massachusetts, that little old lady'd be locked up right now.
Mhm.
So, but over time, we've not only stifled debate, stifled free speech, literally, and nobody really talks about it. But if you disagree with somebody, you get shut down immediately.
Mhm.
I mean, immediately. And, somebody thinks that they're standing on this higher ground of whatever the topic is, and that, their opinion is the only opinion that's out there.
I agree. It's an unfortunate way of discourse anymore. It's
Right.
it's not only in politics, but it seems like that's been the big mover and shaker, that's caused a lot of it.
Yeah.
People, they're living and dying with it, and to some extent, I'd like to let them know most politicians, I don't wanna say all, but most politicians aren't really aware of what you're doing, nor do they care that you're doing that. I mean, I guess they prefer you're out there, defending them, but they're not really looking out for you. You know, we've
No.
had we've had such a storied list of elected officials here in Illinois who have gone on to serve time in prison. It's laughable. Some of them have been elected even after being indicted. It's like, how do you manage that? You would think you're not getting
Yeah.
elected.
Yeah. I have to wonder about the people's thought process around some of this stuff, Dennis. You have the mayor of Chicago, who year in and year out has basically oversaw, I don't know how many hundreds of murders that have happened in Chicago, and then had the unmitigated gall to complain that Donald Trump would send in the troops to the National Guard to try to slow the slaughter down that's going on in South Chicago. And then you have the governor, for God's sake, you know, basically just babbling about stuff. And to be honest with you, Dennis, I don't understand how people vote for that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Chicago's had a Democrat mayor as long as I can remember,
Yeah.
even though
Well,
now
that's
they're
true.
running nonpartisan, but everybody knows,
Right.
it's a Democrat, and they haven't done a very good job for a long time.
Yeah.
But there are people in Chicago, and I've run into them who say, "But I can't. I can't vote for a Republican. I just can't. Why not? You should try
That
something new.
yeah, it's kind of like, it's it hurts when I do this, right?
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I have to just take a step back and say, okay, it's kind of be careful what you wish for or who you voted for because you've kind of got what you voted for. But, I
Yeah,
don't know that that's a
absolutely.
good way. I don't know if that's a good way to look at it. It's like the poor folks in New York City, right? I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how he he unwinds himself from how he got himself elected because I think the good citizens of New York City are going to explain to him how the cow ate the cabbage. But
Well, yeah. Well, it might be one of those, you do a term. It's, you only last. We've had that trouble with our, recent, we had Lori Lightfoot as the mayor in Chicago. Now we have Brandon
right,
Johnson. Johnson's, approval is, I think, under 20% right now. That's not really a good recipe for being reelected. And, chances are he'll be a one term and out. And but that doesn't the next person they get might not be any better. The people they keep electing, I don't understand it. If I voted for someone and they really let me down, I sure wouldn't vote for a carbon copy of him
no,
or
I wouldn't.
someone,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
makes no sense.
no, it does not make any sense. So let me bring us back and realign ourselves around your book a little bit. Why don't you talk a little bit about Burr and Hamilton? You mentioned the fact that it was an opinion piece that basically got the whole dispute going. But like I said, you have the weaponization of the DOJ from the last administration, and quite frankly, you've had the weaponization at least has been noted like from Obama and on because you had the IRS targeting the Tea Party and
Mhm.
so on and so forth. So it's like I said at the beginning, the rascals haven't really changed, just their names.
Yeah, and I think, there's a lot there, right? I mean,
Yeah,
if you go back to the Burr time, we have documents that suggest Jefferson was running the prosecution of Burr from the White House. If the, I don't know if that was the first instance of lawfare, but it might have been.
it probably was, and that in itself is the sad part, Dennis, is the fact that we don't teach real history anymore, right?
Mhm.
What we're talking about here, what your book explains, people should know, but if you went out and asked somebody on the street, Burr and Hamilton, what happened there? They just look at you like you fell off the egg truck,
Right.
you
All
know?
all they would know is what in school everybody is taught there was a
Right.
duel, and
Yeah.
Burr killed Hamilton. It's kind of the shortened version, and you're like, "Oh, Burr's the bad guy. I got it. He killed a guy." But they don't explain everything around that. They don't explain anything about Hamilton really. And they had this contentious relationship for maybe reasons unknown, but some of it's they're both out of New York. Hamilton had his fingers in everything, although he was never elected to anything. It's amazing. This guy was the power behind the throne, basically, everywhere he went. And I mean, there are some good things, I think he did. But the idea that, he's presented as the hero in history, that's probably an indictment of our educational system. We learn so little. And, as I looked into Burr and you see, wait, this guy was charged with treason twice. If I was taught that, I certainly don't remember it because the thing that sticks with you is the duel. And that's what you remember. And with Jefferson, I never knew he took any part in if I did know about the Burr conspiracy charges, I certainly didn't know Jefferson was directing the prosecution or that the U.S. attorney out of Kentucky was related to Madison. It's like, wait a minute, there's a lot of things going on here, and
Mhm.
those
Yep.
things aren't really taught. And maybe there's not enough time. I don't know. We don't dig far enough into into history. And
Well, I yeah, I think you're giving them a pass
Maybe.
because it should be taught, right? It should be part of every civics class, the actual all of the parts and pieces, the good, the bad, and the ugly, if you will, of our country. And I don't see a problem with it. I mean, we're not perfect. Lord knows, I just watched Napoleon the other night, with the French Revolution. We weren't perfect, right? We're not perfect right now. But quite frankly, there's a reason why millions of people are lining up trying to get in here.
Mhm.
If we weren't just a little bit better than where they're trying to come from, right?
Yeah. I think the only one I know of that left was Rosie O'Donnell, but not too many people want to leave the country.
Yeah,
It's you do have people lining up. They'll come in they've always wanted to come to America. I mean, whether legally or illegally, we've always had a strong group of people that want to be, Americans in one way or the other.
right.
Now we could argue about whether they're doing it the right way now or whether they
Well,
should get in
I
line.
think yeah, I think where the argument is the way that the last 4 years they went about the last 4 years, and the fact that we cannot collectively solve the immigration issue. We can't put things in place that will take care of it. It's very much like the whole healthcare thing. You have a bunch of guys that all they're really good at is campaigning, deciding healthcare for the entire country. Nah, what you need is a bunch of people from the Mayo Clinic, from Emory, from all the different large healthcare organizations, and they all need to put their heads together, not politicians, right?
Right. Well, the politicians, and it's amazing to me, they talk a lot about, millions will lose health care coverage, which no, you won't lose health care coverage. It might be more expensive, it might not, but it's gone up since Obamacare started. And Obamacare only affects like between 6 and 7% of the population. So what are we talking about? They make it sound like all of us will lose our insurance. Well,
Right.
that's insane.
Well, that's kind
And
of
it's
like
not all
you're going to be able to keep your own doctor kind of crap,
right.
right?
Well, and they'll say poor people will die. Well, poor people are on Medicaid. So I don't know what you're talking about. If you're over 65, you're entitled to Medicare. If
Right.
we're cutting
Yeah.
out that side, rich
Right.
people obviously don't care. I mean,
No.
they
No.
shouldn't.
And the essence of the whole thing is there's nothing constitutional about it. It's
Right.
just like education. There's nothing in those documents that says thou shalt distribute health care to the population, right?
Right. Yeah,
So,
it's just everybody you have other countries that have done socialized, healthcare, and it hasn't worked out, but they
no,
use that as look at they can if they can do it in Sweden, why can't they do it here? Well, because we have 340 million people for one thing, you know, plus
right.
we like our freedoms. We do want to choose our doctors. You know, we want to have a say in our healthcare and we don't want to be in line.
No, exactly. And, I think Trump has probably got some of the better ideas going forward, with the HSA and everything else. But this extension on what basically shut the government down for 30 some odd days and extending that to 2 years is completely lunacy. What they ought to do is just ship it back to the states, let the states take care of it, because the states collect the money, then they take the money and they send it to Washington. Why can't the states just take care of it on a state to state basis and be done with it?
A good question. I don't know. And every time someone touches it, it's the same way with money
Yeah,
coming from Washington. When they go the
right,
other way, they'll send it to the states who then distribute to the locals. It's like, why don't you just distribute to the locals? The state just
right.
has administrative costs that
Yeah,
they're taking a
exactly.
piece.
Well, see the carrying charge, if you did that, you leave out the politicians. And somewhere behind, if you pull the curtain back, there's money changing hands all the time with all of this. It's just like the NGOs. They go out and they give an NGO $1 billion. I've got to believe at least I do believe that somewhere in the background, there's a carrying charge, a fee for that effort, right? Because you
Mhm.
can't take somebody, for example, like Cortez, who was a barista and making $50,000 a year. Now all of a sudden she's a multimillionaire and she's only been in Washington a couple of years. How does that happen? I know people that have worked their entire life that have never gotten to that point. Uh,
Mhm.
so how does a politician go from sloshing coffee to becoming a multimillionaire? That it just doesn't line up.
Right, I have some theories. You know everybody has theories, but you do wonder,
Sure.
it seems like everybody that goes to Congress, and you get paid 175,000. I don't want to diminish that as a salary, but it shouldn't be making you a millionaire. It's a good salary, but I I suspect the thing is they have so much other money around them with campaign funds and with other sources where people perhaps are, either lending them money or giving them money, but somehow they're able to, buy stocks before anybody else knows and they know where it's going. And that part should be illegal. I don't know how you do that, but it should be. And then at the other end, we if we actually investigated each one of them, we'd find out where follow the money. Where is that money coming
Well,
from?
right.
Can't because if you're sitting there making 175,000, like I said, it's a good salary, but it's hard to make, in a couple of years or whatever she's been there. Do you really turn into a multimillionaire? I
Yeah,
don't know.
exactly.
That's great investing.
Well,
And
yeah, it really is. And maybe she should not be a politician, and maybe she should be out teaching how to invest $170,000 a year. In 3 or 4 years, you become a multimillionaire. Maybe and still pay for your housing, your food, and all the other parts and pieces that normal life brings about.
right.
That should be pretty interesting to figure all of that out. I know Musk wanted to go chasing down that rabbit hole, and he mentioned it, and it got squashed about as fast as he could get the words out of his mouth.
Yeah.
And then you have Congress that has not codified anything that that Elon and his team went out and found as far as corruption and fiscal abuse
Mhm.
in our government. That they haven't
Yeah.
done anything around it. Now they're refusing to do the filibuster, and if they lose the midterms, they're done, right? Everything that we've enjoyed or will have enjoyed for 2 years will be gone.
And we're back to impeachments and all that stuff.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely.
you can, because if you're on the other side, if you're a Democrat, you're going to say, well, it worked. Throwing
Yeah.
up roadblocks and screaming and yelling. I can't imagine how it works. I can't imagine that, people are buying into the protesters when ICE is out arresting illegals. That,
No.
they're actually getting support for that. And I'm looking at it going, I support ICE. I
Yeah.
don't understand. And
Yeah,
I do not
exactly.
support the people out there doing that.
No.
But some people
Yeah.
do. They're gaining in the polls. And I don't
Right.
know if it's that reason or if it's just people are feeling the trouble of an economy that Biden started and hasn't fully
Yeah, well, for some reason, they still think that Trump was going to be able to unravel 4 years of BS in like, record time, and he's unraveled a lot, but, I mean, some of the stuff you're not gonna unravel in a year, and nobody's giving him any kind of a grace period around it, and then, obviously, the Democrats are hovering around him, like a bunch of buzzards, just waiting for him to make a misstep, so
I agree. And I've seen some of the, Trump advisors saying, I think it was Scott Bessent was on saying, well, when the tax returns are filed and people get these
yeah,
refunds, they're going to get 1,000 more. I don't know how he
right,
figures that, but I know there's tax cuts and then your check should be bigger because now the tax rate. Okay,
right.
let's assume that's all true. That still gives you a short time before the November elections.
Yeah, Yeah, because come the first of the year, it's gonna be all hands on deck for the midterms, right? For
Yeah.
the next 11 months, it's gonna be nothing but wall to wall crapola. So,
And you never know what that issue is. Right now, it may be the economy, although the Democrats are fighting on the immigration issue, which I would think that's been decided. People want, you know,
yeah.
they wanted the border closed. I think maybe, out of sight, out of mind, that now all they see are illegals getting arrested. It's not the same as illegals hitting someone over the head and
Well,
taking the
yeah,
purse.
and they're pulling on everybody's heartstring. You come and you grab somebody, and they're only one of the family members and the kids, and they completely lose sight of the fact. I mean, I think everybody has a certain amount of empathy for people trying to better themselves, but in by just kicking the can down the road, Dennis, I say they've created this problem. Both the Democrats and the Republicans and the previous administrations have all created this problem. I just think we saw it reach critical mass underneath Sleepy Joe
Yeah.
because they've been trying to do that crap for a long time. Trump cut it off at the knees in his first term, but you know the people before him, they were a proponent of all of this crap. So
Well, and
you know,
I don't think they understood the real game plan of the Democrats. I know I didn't. I bought into the idea that, oh, the Republican business guys want illegals here for cheap labor. And, this is what they told us, right? And the
yeah,
Democrats want them for votes. Well, that part's
right,
true. The Democrats want them for electoral votes. And Trump and his people were smart enough to say, why are they counted in the census? I agree. Why? I mean, you would see the Democrats have a different song that they'd be singing if they weren't counted in the census. There would have
right,
been 10 to 15, congressional districts moved from Illinois, New York, California, and they'd be in Texas, Florida, Tennessee. Then they'd be saying, oh no, get rid of them.
yeah,
They're making problems here, crime or whatever. But
right.
because they get those electoral votes, all of a sudden it's a different story. And that's been the real battle. And I think Republicans prior to Trump, I don't want to say they weren't smart enough. Maybe they might have known and didn't care. But
Well, they
whatever the
they were
reason,
they're poor communicators. Period. They're just poor communicators, and they're not using social media to their advantage. The Democrats are. But I would like to bring up one thing. And it just struck me when Lincoln was elected. He was omitted from the ballot in all of the southern states that seceded from the Union for the Civil War. And and the reason I bring that up is the 20 election where everybody, we had all of this election fraud and everything else. Well, that wasn't the first go around of election fraud, right? You had the
right?
Kennedy election fraud and everything else. People just have adolescent amnesia around things, either because they
Yeah.
don't know their history or anything else. But this wasn't the first go round, right? So,
No. And that's it's funny because I think in Chicago and among a lot of Democrats, it was almost a joke. Like, yes, the election was stolen in Chicago. It's like,
yeah,
now, how is that funny, right? But
yeah,
that's how it's
yeah,
told. And it's,
yeah,
and then different people take credit. Was it Mayor Daley? You know,
right,
that's certainly what most political people think. And then you have mobsters saying they played a part in it, that the mob was actually the one doing it. However, maybe they were doing it together. But whatever the way it was done, you know, Nixon should have won. To his credit, it's hard to, historians are never going to want to credit Nixon with anything, I think. But, you
right.
know, he did not
But
complain, for the good of the
nope,
country. I'm not
nope.
sure that is the good of the country that an election is stolen, but, you
Well,
know
I think the reason, and this is just supposition on my part. I think the reason Nixon didn't do it is because he fully recognized that if he started to pull on this string to that sweater, it was gonna go far beyond, and start to entangle, some of the Republicans in the past and so on and so forth. And so
Yeah.
I think he just took it on the chin as part of playing the game and went on with it, right? And then obviously as they got better at it, it became much a bigger and broader enterprise.
Yeah. And
So
I think, to the point that it's been around, it's not only presidential elections. I've been
yeah,
involved with,
yeah, true.
you know, a
Yeah.
lot of local elections. It's a lot easier to steal.
A great many of them, I'm sure, have been manipulated. I'm sure of it.
And you get to some elections, it's decided by one vote. It's like one vote made the difference. And
Exactly.
there's people who have gone, they'll say, well, you have no proof. Well, anecdotal proof. I have people that have told me that they voted for someone, that they went in as a different name. That
Yeah, I mean
that's
I mean,
fraud.
yeah, you have those people that say there's no proof except the guy's on the damn camera, right, stuffing ballot boxes, but there's no proof, right? So
Right.
yeah, it's a lame excuse. So, how is the book doing, by the way?
It's doing okay. Actually, I was just talking to someone. We're hoping that it'll be in the stores in Barnes and Noble after January 1st and in one other store. Right now, it's only online. So we're trying to get it out there. But, for a first time book, I guess it's doing okay.
Good, good, good. We've been talking to Mr. Dennis Brennan, who wrote a fabulous book, The DC Swamp Strikes Back, Aaron Burr, Donald Trump, and Their Similar Battles. It's well worth to read, particularly if you want to school people on history that they either got and forgot or didn't get at all, because there's a lot of information in the book. So I would encourage anybody that picks up the book to share it. Share it as a Christmas gift, for God's sake, because it's important, right? It's very important that people begin to understand that, this isn't the first rodeo.
Yeah, I appreciate that. When you're talking, when people are out there, I've had others tell me, well, why would someone who's not a Trump fan read it? And I said, well, maybe they'll be educated on the real facts. And I think if you
Exactly.
are someone, hey, everything's referenced. Whichever side of the aisle you're on, you can look it up and say, oh, well, he backed this up with a reference or what, everything. It's not like I made these facts up; they're there. Now you might come to a different conclusion reading the same thing, but that's up to you as you read it. And I think it's a good education tool for now and the future.
Yeah, I do too. Have a great Christmas, Dennis. Very Merry
I'm going
Christmas to
to.
you and your family, and thanks so much for coming on and spending the time with us. I really appreciate it. It's been a great conversation.
Well, thank you.
Take care.
Thank you for listening. If you would like to listen to more Clarity from Chaos shows on demand, go to clarityfromchaos.buzzsprout.com or send Dave an email at info@clarityfromchaos.com for information on previous shows. You can also listen to the show on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Twitter, or Google Podcast. Until next time, please remember, it's not about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain. Be well, everyone.